Finally, Alien Romulus was released at the weekend, and after all my trailer discussions and theories, it was a great relief to sit down and watch the film. I'd not been to the cinema for some time, so I thank Fede Alvarez and his amazing team for breaking the cycle and getting me back. This video contains only my initial thoughts, having just seen the movie, and will be void of any spoilers out of respect for those still waiting to see the film. However, I will upload a spoiler review shortly if anyone is interested. It's fair to say that during the build-up of Alien Romulus, I've more or less been in hyper-comparison mode in connection to the first two films, which we all hold dear to our hearts, I know. Although both of these films are flawless in technique and are artistically timeless, they are, however, still a product of another director's vision and remain a bold statement in cinematic history. Thankfully, Alien Romulus is Fede's expression of his love for the franchise, and a pretty good one at that. I won't say there aren't flaws in this film, but if I accept its style of a haunted house in space and a heist mission gone wrong, with a lot of extremely convenient plot mechanisms crammed into a tight time frame, then it's a damn good ride. The movie does borrow heavily from the original films in terms of sight, sound, story themes, and claustrophobic tension. It's all in there in the mix with Fede's style, and it's kind of beautiful when added to the fact that the film does have a lot of heart, and that's what matters. The first thing that caught my attention was the world building, which was an absolute delight to experience. And when you think about it, that's not something we usually get to see in an Alien film, as the typical setting tends to be restricted to a ship or compound. Observing everyday life in the developing colony was short and sweet in the first act. Still, it manages to wonderfully remind me of those deleted scenes from James Cameron's Aliens, where we encountered the colony members on LV-426, going about their daily routines. Except here we can clearly observe the darker side of Weyland-Yutani's influence, and the effects it has on communities living in a world that feels somewhat discarded and forgotten by the company. Not only was I completely absorbed by the atmosphere on Jackson's Star, where the young colony workers were desperately trying to escape their diminishing lives under the oppressive influence of the towering atmospheric processor, but I was able to instantly connect with the characters from start to finish. This was one of my biggest fears about the film, which was probably the result of preconceived ideas I had when sometimes we hear the term young cast as a description for a horror movie, and can you blame me? It's not like we haven't had stinkers in the past that have created these associations for us. But I honestly loved all of their performances, especially the relationship and interactions between Andy and Rain. It's incredibly hard to say who stood out among the group, as they all impressed me at different times, in a variety of horrific situations. I loved Andy's quirkiness and endearing traits that probably existed because of him being a legacy model synthetic, and a faltering one at that. His interactions with all the crew members as they risk their lives on board the station seem to evoke a great sense of urgency, as time is definitely a factor in this film. His story arc was full of surprises and twists and turns that elevated the otherwise simple premise of the film, and his delivery of unpredictableness was a joy to watch. Every moment something did not go their way or some new emerging threat arose, I really sensed their despair and found I was becoming heavily invested in the outcome of this mission and their survival. Between the writing and performances, I found myself beginning to care, and I was so worried I wouldn't. Now, if I were to catalogue every small detail in Romulus, whether it be a sign on the wall or an object they interact with, if I saw it out of context and still said, oh yeah, that looks very alien, then I would need to study Romulus frame by frame, and it may take forever. I don't think there was one piece of furniture, interior decoration, or anything else for that matter that had not been created with thoughtful love and care, and top fan service attention to detail. There were things I recognised from the early films as well as the Alien Isolation game, and quite a few props and construction elements inspired by the game I noticed, which is weirdly what I remember the most for some reason. So 10 out of 10 for the aesthetics and set design, as it could not have been any better. I think most of us are drawn to the retro future look that was highly present here, but a combination of design styles from Aliens and Alien worked a treat. The parts of the station we get to visit are all crafted with practicality and utility in mind, so everything looks built for functionality and nothing feels out of place. It becomes eerily relatable when we start to see facehuggers traversing familiar-looking ventilation tubes from machines in the labs that could just as easily be part of today's construction. Then, as the camera changes, we are swiftly reminded that we are in a fictional future where horrors unfold and nobody can hear you scream. The sound design was perfect and brought many nostalgic emotions hidden away inside of me right back to the surface again. I guess what I'm trying to say is I truly felt absorbed in the film, and that was a good feeling indeed. Apart from the fact that 2 hours felt like one. The music, much like the rest of the film, was an amalgamation of the first 3 films, I would say, with the addition of some fantastic new scores. Some scenes in Romulus were extremely reminiscent of events that had happened in the other films, which was made more so by the matching music score as well. I didn't really mind some of these member berries, as Romulus does stand well enough on its own, but the one that gave me a little chuckle was the Prometheus audio cue, as that particular grand and lofty music score disrupted some of the continuity just a tad for me, as I'm not sure it fit the situation and flow. My only real criticism of the Easter egg approach is that sometimes some of the dialogue felt unnecessary. There were a few lines that were recited quite literally verbatim from Alien or Aliens. A couple of those moments were the only issues I had that sharply pulled me out of the film, albeit just for a few seconds, that is. The fact that one of the lines taken from Aliens, which is based 37 years after Romulus, was kinda strange to me as well. I won't speak too much about the plot, as I really don't want to give anything away further than what we saw in the trailers, but one important aspect of Romulus that I was super excited to see was the practical effects and cinematography. There were some leaks and teasings I think that we all heard about regarding the direction the film was going to take. Some of those discussions were centred around the xenomorph's life cycle and what variations of the infamous creature we might encounter. This might be the first time we've seen such a high level of practical effects since Aliens, but this time with much more clarity. I can only imagine that Fede and his special effects team had their work cut out for them, perhaps far more than Ridley or Cameron ever did, but only in the attention to detail perhaps. I say this because the film offers so many close-up shots of xenomorphs we've never seen before, as well as what I perceived as the known and familiar, but in a much more graphic and lifelike portrayal. There are more shots of the grotesque and unimaginable reality that depict these aliens than we've ever seen in a single film, but not only that, I have to give Fede his due for the simple fact that under the ever-increasing and harsh critique of the higher resolutions and better technology magnifying glass, everything looked spot on, not a single iffy CGI moment at all. Well, except one. There was one bit that made me squirm in contrast to the rest of the film, and then weirdly it seemed to resolve itself all of a sudden. I can't really talk about it in this video because it is a spoiler, but I'll just say it has something to do with the unsettling feelings of Uncanny Valley. Thankfully it was just a brief moment and nothing to warrant me giving this film a bad review, far from it in fact. Something I really did enjoy and appreciate during the course of the film was the infusion of science-related information. Were there ties to the newly introduced black goo and other non-legacy elements? Well, maybe. But what we learned and how we learned certain knowledge pertaining to the original film and even just the very nature of the xenomorph in general was quite refreshing. Nothing was over-explained, and the snippets of previous events on board the station with the Weyland-Yutani personnel were fantastic little teases into events that left me desiring to know more about the story of the station and the very thing they first discovered. Overall, I feel like the film could have been longer, not in the sense that the crew should have had longer to do what they needed to do in the time given, but I would have appreciated some downtime among the chaos. I'm reminded of how much I love those eerie but calming scenes in Alien when the beast is off growing somewhere and the crew take a moment to talk tactics. Or in Aliens when the Marines have some rest and re-evaluate their situation before the horde of Xenos make their way inside the complex. The first half of Romulus is suitably slow and does give us a good chance to get acquainted with the characters and their backstories in a way that feels effortless. However, when the shit hits the fan, and trust me, it makes contact before you're ready for it, the second half of the film is intended to be a roller coaster of thrills, violence and a very heavy dollop of unsettling tension that does work exceedingly well. I think I just could have used a break in the onslaught and a time out perhaps, as some aspects did feel ever so slightly rushed, especially when considering the time needed for the aliens to grow. However, it was clearly the intention to keep the audience on their toes and to never let up. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't fully immersed and deeply curious as we followed the last few stragglers into the descending chaos and madness that the film was relentless in providing. Now, the final act involves something that I do believe will make or break this film for many folks that have been long-time fans of the franchise. Again, no spoilers, but I will say that what was presented in all of its horrifying glory was something that disturbed me significantly. So many compliments to the chef for his use of lighting and orchestrating suspense in those final scenes, as it did freak me out quite a bit. But whether you enjoy the ending or not, it does have meaning that relates heavily to the context of Weyland-Yutani's goals, giving us a bit more clarity in the mindset of the company between events in Prometheus right up to Romulus. I think if the director had not been such a master at capturing suspense and portraying pure visceral horror on screen, then these last moments would not have worked at all. I can also respect the way this additional lore was explored without becoming obsessed with it in a way that hindered Prometheus and Covenant from becoming the proper Alien films we were hoping for. So those are my initial thoughts. Did I like the film? Hell yeah. Am I going back to see it? Absolutely. The first two films may never be beaten in my eyes, but Romulus has burst its way into our cinemas in true back-to-basics Alien fashion, and offers some genuinely horrifying experiences. It isn't perfect, and probably won't please everybody who is a fan of the franchise, but I can wholeheartedly say that it is what the franchise needs right now, and I had a great time watching it. Hopefully this will be a bright beginning to more films, and maybe we'll even see Fede Alvarez returning for another perhaps. In the meantime, stay tuned for my spoiler review, and go see the film if you haven't. The dude approves.